By 1909, William Keith Kellogg's company in Battle Creek was producing and shipping 120,000 cases of corn flakes every day. More than 80 cereal companies had appeared in the same small Michigan city, making products from wheat, corn, rice, oats, and even celery. Between 1997 and 1999, Kellogg cut more than 700 Battle Creek jobs as production moved elsewhere. The cereal survived. The capital had been hollowed out. Before Battle Creek became a name printed on cereal boxes, it was the place where two rivers met. The Battle Creek River came in from the northeast and emptied into the broader Kalamazoo, which continued west toward Lake Michigan. Around the water lay oak openings, marshy ground, and stretches of prairie that could be planted without first cutting through miles of heavy forest. The Potawatomi had lived, hunted, planted, and traveled through this country long before federal surveyors arrived with chains, compasses, and instructions to divide it into property. The city's name came from an encounter that was smaller than the word eventually used to describe it. In March 1825, a government surveying party clashed with two Potawatomi men near a creek several miles from the future settlement. Accounts disagree about exactly what happened. The surveyor John Mullet later recalled that no one was killed and that no one was badly hurt. Still, the stream became Battle Creek, and the town later took the same name. It was a large name for a brief and poorly documented struggle. Battle Creek would carry it into an age of flour mills, printing presses, health cures, and breakfast food. In 1831, a land speculator named Sands McCamley reached the confluence and recognized what the water could do. Rivers could turn machinery. Prairie soil could grow grain. The Kalamazoo could connect a settlement to farms and towns farther west. McCamley and the families who followed him did not arrive in empty country. Federal treaties and removal policies were already forcing the Potawatomi from land that settlers intended to occupy. In 1840, members of the Nottawasepi Huron Band of the Potawatomi were compelled to begin a westward removal. Some escaped. Others returned to Michigan within 2 years. In 1845, between 40 and 60 tribal members pooled treaty money to purchase 120 acres near Pine Creek, south of Battle Creek. While one community was being pushed away from the land, another was surveying streets, opening stores, and recording deeds upon it. The new settlement served the surrounding farms. Sawmills cut trees into boards. Flour mills ground wheat. Grain moved into town in sacks and left as something worth more than the crop that had entered. This was the first economic habit Battle Creek learned. Take an agricultural product, run it through machinery, package the result, and send it somewhere else. The river supplied the first motion. The railroad supplied distance. On November 25, 1845, train service began between Detroit and Battle Creek. The Michigan Central Line reached the village from the east and continued toward Kalamazoo the following year. What had been a market town at the edge of a farming district now had iron rails leading toward Detroit, the Great Lakes, and eventually Chicago. A barrel of flour no longer had to move at the speed of a wagon over a muddy road. Machinery built in Battle Creek could be sold hundreds of miles away. Other tracks followed. By 1870, a second railroad connected the city with Charlotte to the northeast and Chicago to the southwest. Warehouses gathered near the rails. Coal, timber, iron, livestock, passengers, and mail passed through the same narrow corridors. The rivers had chosen the location. The railroads enlarged its reach. Battle Creek incorporated as a town in 1859. By the closing decades of the 19th century, more than 22,000 people lived there. They did not yet depend on cereal. They manufactured threshing machines for farms on the American plains and in Russia. They built steam pumps for factories and mines. Other shops produced newspaper presses, violin strings, bricks, and agricultural implements. Those industries mattered to what came later. Battle Creek already understood rollers, belts, boilers, ovens, printed labels, and freight schedules. It had workers who could keep machinery running and businessmen who knew that a product made beside the Kalamazoo River could be sold far beyond Michigan. Cereal would not create those abilities. It would gather them around a single cardboard box. The city also attracted people interested in changing more than grain. Quakers from New York settled in the area, including men and women willing to violate federal law by helping enslaved people travel north. Erastus and Sarah Hussey operated a station on the Underground Railroad. Sojourner Truth visited Battle Creek in 1856 and moved to the area the following year. For the final 27 years of her life, she used it as a home between journeys made on behalf of abolition and women's rights. Spiritualists also came. Seances and table knocking found audiences alongside churches, factories, and machine shops. Battle Creek developed a tolerance for people who believed the visible world could be rearranged by political action, divine revelation, disciplined living, or forces that could not be seen. That disposition drew a small body of Sabbath-keeping Adventists. In 1855, James and Ellen White moved their publishing work to Battle Creek. Their followers observed the Sabbath on Saturday and expected the return of Christ. They also printed. Type was set, ink was spread, paper was folded, and religious arguments left Battle Creek by rail in bundles. The denomination organized formally in 1863. Its leaders taught that the condition of the body and the condition of the spirit could not be separated. Tobacco, alcohol, rich food, stale air, and physical idleness were not merely private habits. They interfered with the life a believer was supposed to lead. 3 years later, the church opened the Western Health Reform Institute in a converted house on 8 acres in Battle Creek. It began accepting patients on September 5, 1866. There was little about the building to suggest what would follow. It was not yet a sprawling resort, and Battle Creek was not yet Health City. The Institute offered water treatments, rest, exercise, fresh air, and a plain diet at a time when many physicians still relied on bleeding, purgatives, and medicines containing toxic metals. In 1876, a 24-year-old physician named John Harvey Kellogg took charge. No cornflakes had been produced, no cereal fortune had been made. But the essential pieces were already in Battle Creek. Grain from the prairie, rollers from the machine shops, printing presses for advertising, railroad cars for distribution, and a community prepared to believe that changing what a person ate might change the person. The river had brought them together. John Harvey Kellogg arrived at medicine through his own body. He had been a sick child. Tuberculosis damaged his left lung, and painful intestinal problems followed him through youth. 6 of his siblings and half-siblings died from infectious diseases within 9 years. In the Kellogg household, illness was not an interruption. It was part of the furniture. The medicine available in mid-19th century Michigan offered little comfort. Physicians still bled patients, prescribed purgatives, and administered compounds containing arsenic and other toxic substances. Germ theory had not yet reorganized American medical practice. There were no antibiotics. A doctor could identify pain more easily than he could remove its cause. The Seventh-day Adventists in Battle Creek offered John another way to think about the body. Ellen White taught that physical health, mental discipline, and spiritual life belonged to the same system. Cleanliness mattered, sleep mattered, fresh air, exercise, water, and food mattered. The body was not merely something to be endured until the next world. It was an instrument that required care in this one. John first worked for the church as a boy, setting metal type and filling inkwells in its printing office. Ellen and James White recognized his ability and encouraged his education. In 1873, he entered medical school at the University of Michigan. He later studied at Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York. where he encountered the newest medicine available in the country, though much of it would appear primitive by modern standards. In 1876, at the age of 24, John Harvey Kellogg became superintendent of the Western Health Reform Institute. The position did not look like the beginning of an empire. The institute had opened 10 years earlier in a converted residence surrounded by 8 acres. Its purpose was to treat illness without depending on the heavy drugs and surgical risks common to the period. Patients received rest, fresh air, water treatments, exercise, and carefully regulated meals. John changed its scale and eventually changed its name. He called it the Battle Creek Sanatorium, altering the familiar word sanatorium to suggest a place where health could be preserved, not simply a place where the sick were confined. The distinction mattered. A patient did not come to Battle Creek only to have a disease treated. The sanitarium examined the patient's entire routine: the hour of waking, the amount of sleep, the clothing worn, the water consumed, the food swallowed, the condition of the bowels, and the number of minutes spent outdoors. John called his system biologic living. Health was not delivered in a bottle. It was produced by a schedule. At the center of that schedule was the stomach. John believed that much of American illness began with what Americans ate. A typical breakfast could include fried potatoes, sausage, ham, steak, hot biscuits, butter, and coffee. Meat might appear again at noon and in the evening. Grain was often served only after hours of boiling, or baked into bread made with refined flour. Fresh fruit and vegetables were difficult to obtain in many places during winter. Constipation and chronic indigestion were common enough to become part of ordinary conversation. The sanitarium dining room removed the stimulants and the heavy meat. Alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and tea were prohibited. Meals emphasized fruits, vegetables, nuts, milk, and whole grains. The food was deliberately mild. John distrusted strong seasoning because he believed it encouraged people to eat beyond hunger. Pleasure at the table was treated with suspicion. Digestion came first. Food was only one department. Patients moved through rooms devoted to hot and cold water. They received baths, sprays, compresses, wet sheet wraps, salt rubs, and streams directed at particular parts of the body. Exercise took place indoors and outside. Patients walked, stretched, lifted weights, and used mechanical devices designed to move muscles that had grown weak through inactivity. Later, equipment shook, rolled, pressed, or vibrated the body. Some machines resembled industrial tools with upholstered seats attached. There were treatments that anticipated modern preventive medicine, and others that belonged unmistakably to their century. Clean water, physical activity, sleep, sanitation, and a diet rich in fiber could help many patients. Electrical treatments, elaborate bowel procedures, and some of John's mechanical inventions rested on claims that medicine could not sustain. They operated side by side. The sanitarium grew because it offered something conventional hospitals often did not: time. A patient might remain for weeks or months. Physicians watched meals, sleep, exercise, and digestion. Nurses kept records. Lectures taught guests how to reproduce the program at home. The institution was part hospital, part school, and part resort, with the authority of medicine and the daily structure of a religious community. In 1878, a larger wooden main building opened. It was expanded in 1884 and again in 1891. Cottages, treatment rooms, kitchens, laundries, offices, and service buildings accumulated around it. The institution became a campus. Patients arrived by railroad carrying trunks rather than overnight bags. Battle Creek became the busiest passenger stop in Michigan after Detroit. Porters handled luggage. Carriages waited near the station. Boarding houses, shops, farms, and laundries served the stream of guests and workers. The city had found a new export. Instead of shipping a machine outward, it brought the customer in. John Harvey Kellogg became the public face of the system. He wrote books, edited health publications, lectured, performed surgery, supervised experiments, and moved rapidly between buildings. His younger brother, William Keith Kellogg, supplied much of the labor that made this possible. William began working at the sanitarium in 1880. He managed accounts, handled correspondence, oversaw publications, and helped administer the growing institution. He later recalled working as many as 120 hours in a week for little pay. One familiar sight on the grounds was John riding a bicycle while dictating, with William following on foot and attempting to record his words. Their roles were already visible. John generated instructions. William made the system function. The sanitarium's growth created a practical problem. Patients could follow the prescribed diet in Battle Creek, where cooks prepared every plate and physicians controlled the menu. At home, grain required time. Wheat, oats, and barley might need hours on a stove before they became soft enough to eat. The sanitarium needed food that was plain, digestible, consistent, and easy to send through the mail. In its experimental kitchen, grain passed from sacks into kettles, ovens, grinders, and rollers. Batch after batch produced crumbs, biscuits, and hard pieces that demanded strong teeth or long soaking. Battle Creek had learned how to treat the stomach. It had not yet learned how to package the cure. The Kellogg's did not invent the idea of eating dry grain for breakfast. In 1863, a physician named James Caleb Jackson began selling granola from his health resort in Dansville, New York. Jackson baked graham flour into hard sheets, broke them apart, baked the pieces again, and reduced them to nuggets. The result could be stored, shipped, and served without cooking, but it was hard enough to require soaking overnight. John Harvey Kellogg developed a similar product for patients in Battle Creek. He combined wheat, oats, and corn, baked the mixture for hours, and broke the finished slabs into crumbs. He also called his product granola until Jackson threatened legal action. John changed one letter and renamed it granola. The food was durable, but it had not solved the problem. Granola still demanded strong teeth. Its rough pieces did not resemble the soft, easily digested meal John wanted for invalids and patients recovering from surgery. Porridge remained easier to swallow, but porridge required a stove, a pot, water, fuel, and time. The sanitarium needed something with the convenience of a cracker and the digestive qualities of cooked grain. That problem moved into the experimental kitchen. Ella Eaton Kellogg, John's wife, was not merely watching from the doorway. She had studied hygiene, trained at the sanitarium, supervised its dietetics work, and tested recipes intended to make a meatless diet practical. In her kitchen, grain was soaked, ground, boiled, baked, crushed, rolled, and baked again. Wheat might emerge as crumbs, sheets, biscuits, or fragments too hard to serve. William Keith Kellogg also worked on the problem. As the sanitarium's administrator, he saw what happened after a successful food reached the dining room. Patients asked for it again. Departing guests wanted supplies sent to their homes. A recipe that satisfied one table could become hundreds of parcels, invoices, and letters. The familiar account says that in 1894, a batch of cooked wheat was left standing after John was called away. Some versions say it remained overnight. Others extend the interval. Corporate histories later moved the discovery as late as 1898, but John applied for a patent in 1895, making the earlier date more credible. The identities of the people in the kitchen are also disputed. John claimed the invention. William later insisted that he had worked beside his brother and deserved more credit. Ella's account placed her own experiments closer to the center. Some versions gave her the idea of rolling the dough into thin sheets. Their memories were recorded after the flake had acquired money, patents, and a family quarrel. Each account illuminated the invention from a different room. What can be established is the process. Cooked wheat that might ordinarily have been discarded was passed through rollers. Earlier mixtures had broken into shapeless crumbs. This batch behaved differently. Moisture had spread through the individual kernels during the period of rest. When pressure was applied, the kernels flattened instead of disintegrating. Each one emerged as a thin, separate film. The flakes were placed on trays and baked. Heat drove away the remaining moisture and browned the surface. What came from the oven was dry, crisp, and light enough to fracture between the teeth. It did not need hours in a breakfast pot. It did not need to be soaked overnight. The accident was not simply that grain had been forgotten. The useful discovery was that controlled resting, cooking, rolling, and baking could be repeated. William was given the task of making it repeatable. A kitchen accident could produce 1 tray of good flakes and 10 trays of waste. A commercial process had to deliver the same thickness, color, dryness, and texture, regardless of the wheat or the weather. Cooking time had to be measured. Moisture had to be controlled. Rollers required careful adjustment. Too much pressure produced paste. Too little left thick pieces that would not crisp. The work moved from recipe to system. John filed his patent application on May 31, 1895. Patent number 558,393 was granted on April 14, 1896, under the title Flaked Cereals and Process of Preparing Same. John Harvey Kellogg was the only inventor named. The document described a sequence precise enough to be performed outside the sanitarium kitchen. Grain was to be soaked in water for 8 to 12 hours, thoroughly cooked, cooled, partially dried, and passed through cold rollers. The flattened kernels were then steamed and baked or roasted until dry and crisp. The patent did not limit the process to wheat. It named barley, oats, corn, and other grains. The language was medical rather than commercial. The purpose was to create food that could be digested without further cooking, and was especially suited to sick and recovering patients. The finished wheat flakes were named Granose. Granose did not look like the cereal that would later fill supermarket aisles. It had no colored mascot, toy, frosting, or flavor designed for children. It was brown, plain, brittle, and served because John believed chewing it encouraged saliva and helped digestion. At the sanitarium, that was enough. Patients wanted it outside Battle Creek. William organized a mail-order operation so former guests could purchase the foods they had eaten during treatment. Names and addresses accumulated. Paper orders arrived by rail and post. Grain was cooked in larger quantities. The product moved into packages, and those packages carried the name Battle Creek into homes that had never sent a patient to Michigan. During the first year, the Kellogg's sold tens of thousands of pounds of flaked cereal. Demand no longer came only from physicians prescribing a diet. It came from people who found that a dry flake was easier to prepare than hot grain. The difference was small at first. The same boxes could be described as medical food or breakfast. The same customer could be treated as a former patient or a household shopper. John saw Granose as one part of a controlled health program. William saw orders arriving from people who had no intention of returning to the sanitarium. The brothers continued experimenting. Rice passed through the rollers. Corn produced a flake with a different color, texture, and natural sweetness. In 1898, the sanitarium food business released an early toasted cornflake, though keeping it crisp on a shelf remained difficult. The product still required refinement. By then, the invention had crossed an invisible boundary. It had begun as a way to make wheat easier for a sick person to digest. Now it could be manufactured before the eater asked for it, stored until needed, transported by rail, and poured from a package in seconds. The cure had become a product. The product was still inside the sanitarium. It would not remain there. Charles William Post came to Battle Creek because his body had stopped obeying him. He was born in Springfield, Illinois, in 1854, and entered the agricultural machinery business as a young man. He had mechanical ideas, restless energy, and a habit of working until work became indistinguishable from illness. Business disputes and failed ventures followed. So did periods of physical collapse, depression, stomach trouble, and what physicians of the period called nervous exhaustion. By 1891, Post was approaching 40 and believed he might be dying. He entered the Battle Creek Sanitarium early that year and remained for much of it. Later descriptions remembered him as thin, weak, and sometimes moved around the grounds in a wheelchair by his wife Ella. John Harvey Kellogg prescribed the institution's familiar combination of regulated meals, water treatments, exercise, rest, and attention to the bowels. The treatment did not restore Post to his own satisfaction. He later gave more credit to mental healing and Christian Science than to John's methods. But recovery was not the only thing he carried away from the sanitarium. Post had seen the kitchen. He had watched patients arrive with indigestion, fatigue, and fear, then accept unfamiliar foods because a physician had attached a theory to them. Grain beverages replaced coffee. Dry cereal replaced meat. A printed explanation turned a plain meal into part of a treatment. Former patients ordered the same products after returning home. The sanitarium treated health inside Battle Creek. Its food business could reach anyone with a postal address. Post stayed in the city. In March 1892, he opened a small health establishment called La Vita Inn. It offered mental therapy, regulated living, and foods that reflected the diet reform culture surrounding the sanitarium. La Vita never approached the size or reputation of John Harvey Kellogg's institution. Its importance lay elsewhere. It gave Post a place to test products and language. One of those products was a hot grain beverage. John had long opposed coffee, regarding caffeine as a stimulant that burdened the nerves and disturbed digestion. The sanitarium served grain-based substitutes made from roasted ingredients. Post developed his own version from wheat, bran, and molasses. When brewed, it produced a dark brown drink with a roasted smell and enough bitterness to occupy the place on the table where coffee had been. He called it Postum. There is no reliable evidence that Post carried a stolen written recipe out of the sanitarium. The ingredients and the idea of grain coffee were already circulating among health reformers. What Post took from Battle Creek was larger than a formula. He understood that an ordinary food could be sold as the answer to a private discomfort. In 1895, he made his first commercial batch of Postum in a barn in Battle Creek and founded the Postum Cereal Company. At first, the product had to overcome a simple problem. Coffee tasted like coffee. Postum did not. Post could not sell the drink by flavor alone, so he changed the argument. The customer was not choosing between two beverages. The customer was choosing between illness and recovery. Post wrote much of the early advertising himself. His advertisements often resembled newspaper articles or medical advice. Coffee became an antagonist capable of producing sleeplessness, weak nerves, poor digestion, and a long list of other troubles. Postum became the route away from them. The copy was direct, repetitive, and personal. It described sick people who abandoned coffee, used Postum, and recovered. It promised a road to what Post called Wellville, a condition in which correct food restored strength and clear thought. The package contained roasted grain. The advertisement contained the diagnosis. Post bought space in newspapers and magazines beyond Michigan. Rail lines carried the product outward, but printed claims traveled first. A reader in Ohio, Pennsylvania, or New York could encounter Post's argument before any local grocer carried the box. Demand could then pull the product into the store. The method reversed the ordinary movement of goods. Instead of waiting for merchants to introduce Postum to customers, Post introduced it through advertising and made customers ask merchants for it. 2 years after Postum appeared, he introduced a dry breakfast food. Grape nuts contained neither grapes nor nuts. It was made from wheat and malted barley flour, baked into hard sheets and broken into small brown granules. The origin of the name remains uncertain. Post offered explanations involving grape sugar and the nut-like flavor or texture of the finished pieces. But the name's greater advantage was that it sounded natural, compact, and unlike anything already sitting on a grocery shelf. The product was cooked before it reached the customer. A person could open the package, pour out a portion, add milk or cream, and eat. There was no fire to start and no pot to watch. That convenience carried more power than the medical claims, though Post used both. He called grape nuts one of the most scientific foods in the world. Advertisements connected it to digestion, energy, strong blood, steady nerves, and mental work. Some claims expanded far beyond what the ingredients could support. In later campaigns, Post suggested that his foods could relieve conditions ranging from loose teeth to appendicitis. The claims were not decoration around the product. They were part of the product. A box of grape nuts offered grain. Its advertisements offered an explanation for why a person felt tired after lunch, why a child struggled in school, or why an office worker could not sleep. Post sold food by naming the customer's discomfort before the customer reached the breakfast table. Grape nuts appeared in 1897. By 1899, its advertisements were running across the country. Store demonstrations and samples gave customers a chance to hear the crunch before buying a box. Printed booklets showed how to eat the cereal and repeated the larger system of health surrounding it. The factory grew around ovens, milling rooms, packing tables, and an advertising department. Paper became almost as important as wheat. Boxes required labels. Newspapers required copy. Pamphlets had to be printed, folded, stitched, and inserted. Battle Creek already possessed printing presses, rail service grain suppliers, and workers accustomed to machinery. Post assembled them around a single promise. By 1905, the Postum Cereal Company had become a $5 million enterprise. 10 years earlier, Post had been roasting grain in a barn. That number is worth pausing over. John Harvey Kellogg had developed health foods to keep patients out of the hospital dining room and on a controlled diet. Charles William Post removed the physician, the dining room, and most of the control. He kept the package, the health claim, and the customer's fear of an unreliable stomach. The result was visible across Battle Creek. New buildings rose near the tracks. Grain arrived by the carload. Finished boxes left for cities that had never heard of the sanitarium. Residents who had watched patients travel into town now watched breakfast travel out. Post had shown that the market was not limited to the sick. Soon, Battle Creek would have more cures than illnesses. Charles William Post's success could be measured in brick. At the corner of West Michigan Avenue and McCamley Street, his company erected an office building, a hotel, a theater, and a collection of commercial properties known as the Post Block. Physicians, dentists, lawyers, insurers, and merchants occupied its rooms. Travelers on the New York Central Railroad could step off the train, enter the Post Tavern, and sleep beneath a roof paid for by toasted wheat, malted barley, and advertising ink. Other men looked at those buildings and saw a recipe. By 1902, one observer wrote that everyone in Battle Creek had gone daft over food cereal business. Promoters arrived hoping to repeat the journey from a small batch of grain to a national fortune. Within a period of roughly 2 years, more than 80 cereal company names were registered in and around Battle Creek. That number is worth pausing over. It did not mean that 80 factories stood beside the railroad with ovens burning and freight cars waiting. The official history of Battle Creek describes more than 80 companies in some stage of existence, while the Archives of Michigan identifies at least 30 that actually began making cereal. Some had machinery, workers, and products on grocery shelves. Others had little more than a company name, a proposed formula, and certificates ready for investors. A registration was not a breakfast. The attraction was easy to understand. The raw materials were familiar and comparatively cheap: corn, wheat, rice, and oats from the farms surrounding the city and from fields connected to Battle Creek by rail. The finished product was dry, light, and suitable for shipment. It required no refrigerated car and no butcher's block. A box could travel hundreds of miles and wait on a grocer's shelf for a family that had never seen Michigan. The possible combinations appeared endless. Battle Creek companies mixed, rolled, toasted, puffed, shredded, and ground grain. They flavored their products with ingredients ranging from apples to celery. Some sold flakes. Others sold biscuits, granules, or mixtures intended to be softened with milk. The sanitarium had taught the city to speak about food as treatment, and Charles William Post had shown that the same language could be printed in newspapers. A package did not merely contain grain. It might promise easier digestion, stronger nerves, better sleep, or relief from the discomforts that Americans gathered under the broad and profitable name of dyspepsia. The city already possessed much of what the new trade required. Its printing companies could produce advertisements, labels, instructions, and colored cartons. Its machine shops understood rollers, belts, shafts, pumps, and steam. Its rail connections could carry boxes east toward Detroit and New York, or west toward Chicago and the Plains. Battle Creek had been building threshers, printing presses, and industrial pumps long before it became identified with breakfast. The cereal boom did not replace that machinery. It climbed onto it. But grain was less obedient than the promoters expected. A successful cereal had to survive every stage between the cooker and the spoon. Each batch had to taste like the one before it. A flake had to remain crisp without becoming hard enough to injure the person eating it. It had to endure packing, freight handling, humidity, warehouse storage, and weeks beneath the grocer's lights. The package had to keep out moisture. The price had to cover the grain, the fuel, the box, the railroad charge, the salesman, and the advertisement that persuaded a stranger to take it home. Some products failed at the mouth. Frumenta flakes were so brittle that their sharp edges reportedly cut consumers as they chewed. Others failed on the shelf. Norca's malted oats had an unappealing gray color and spoiled rapidly in grocery stores. No amount of medicinal language could make a customer forget a bleeding lip or persuade a grocer to reorder a box that had gone bad before it sold. The failures were small, but they were not mysterious. A man could imitate the shape of a flake without mastering its moisture. He could copy the tone of an advertisement without building a distribution system. He could place the words "health food" on a carton without giving the grocer a reason to sacrifice shelf space to an unknown company. Cereal looked simple because the finished product weighed almost nothing. The business behind it was heavy. Charles William Post understood that distinction. He did not merely manufacture postum and grape nuts. He surrounded them with repetition. His advertisements appeared across the country, explaining the products, naming supposed ailments, and telling readers where to buy them. The cereal entered a household in print before it entered in a box. Many of his imitators spent their money producing the food and discovered too late that the larger expense was producing demand. For several years, however, the distinction between a durable company and a temporary one remained hidden beneath the excitement. New firms borrowed the authority of Battle Creek itself. The city name on a package suggested that the contents came from the same landscape of physicians, laboratories, kitchens, and grain rollers that had produced postum and granose. Battle Creek became a kind of commercial ingredient. Even a weak product looked stronger when mailed from the cereal city. By 1910, most of the small companies had disappeared. Their registrations remained in records, while their cartons, formulas, and stock certificates drifted into attics and waste paper. The 80-company boom had narrowed to a few businesses capable of manufacturing the same product every day, carrying it across the country, and keeping its name before the public. Post remained. The Maple Flake Company survived and would later be associated with Ralston. And another company, founded in 1906, was expanding with unusual speed. Its founder had watched the boom from inside the sanitarium. William Keith Kellogg had seen how grain behaved after cooking, how flakes broke beneath rollers, how mail orders accumulated, and how Charles William Post turned a health food into a national object. The promoters had shown Battle Creek how easily a cereal company could be created. Their disappearance showed him what creation was worth. The city had produced more than 80 names. Now it would produce one signature. William Keith Kellogg was 46 years old when he finally placed his own name on a cereal box. He was not a young inventor stepping from a kitchen with a lucky discovery. He had spent more than 2 decades inside his brother's institutions, keeping accounts, managing publications, supervising the sanitariums and food business, answering correspondence, and turning John Harvey Kellogg's rapid instructions into organized work. The brothers possessed different kinds of attention. John Harvey Kellogg watched the human body, the movement of the intestine, the effects of exercise, the texture of food after digestion. William Keith Kellogg watched the process, the amount of grain in a batch, the pressure of the rollers, the time in the oven, the cost of a carton, and the number of orders waiting to be filled. For years, one kind of attention served the other. William Keith Kellogg had joined the sanitarium operation in 1880. During his first 7 years, he received little pay and no vacation. He later claimed that his duties sometimes consumed as many as 120 hours in a week, a schedule that left 48 hours for sleep, meals, and everything else. He managed the publication of his brother's books, helped administer the expanding medical complex, and eventually ran the Sanitas food operation that sold the sanitarium's dietary products. John Harvey Kellogg remained in control. He decided what foods belonged in the medical program and how widely they should be sold. To him, a flake was part of a disciplined system involving fresh air, exercise, water, restraint, and vegetarian meals. Separated from that system and sweetened for public taste, the food could become precisely the sort of commercial indulgence he distrusted. His younger brother saw the same flake resting in a bowl. Beginning in the late 1890s, William Keith Kellogg continued experimenting with corn instead of wheat. Corn had a natural sweetness that wheat lacked, but it still had to be cooked evenly, dried without becoming stone-hard, and passed through rollers without breaking into crumbs. He recorded variations in procedure, flavor, and texture. Malt, sugar, and salt made the finished flakes more appealing beyond the sanitarium dining room. The difference between the brothers was no longer about whether a grain could be flaked. They had already answered that. It was about what happened afterward. In 1899, William Keith Kellogg negotiated a share of the net profits from the newly incorporated Sanitas Nut Food Company and became its general manager. It was a step toward independence. But the company still belonged to the sanitarium world, where food was intended primarily for patients and former guests. Meanwhile, Charles William Post's products moved through grocery stores under bold advertisements, and dozens of imitators entered the cereal trade. William Keith Kellogg could see companies selling inferior versions of a process he had spent years refining. On February 19, 1906, he founded the Battle Creek Toasted Corn Flake Company. The new operation began with 44 carefully selected employees. Inside the factory, cooked corn moved through drying, rolling, and toasting, emerging as thin golden flakes that had to remain intact until they reached a breakfast bowl hundreds of miles away. Workers filled cartons, sealed packages, and prepared cases for the railroad. The work repeated itself in batches, but repetition was the point. A customer in New York had to open the same cereal as a customer in Chicago. William Keith Kellogg also understood what the 80 company boom had revealed. A reliable flake could still disappear beneath a crowded grocery shelf. The package needed a mark that competitors could not easily borrow. His handwritten signature appeared across the front of the box as a guarantee that the contents were his company's product. Battle Creek supplied the place. The signature supplied the identity. Then he sent the box into print. One early campaign instructed readers to wink at their grocer and see what they received. The wink brought a free sample of corn flakes. It was a small physical act joining the advertisement, the shopkeeper, and the customer, easy to remember and easier to repeat. In New York City, the campaign multiplied sales 15 times. Orders began arriving faster than the original factory could fill them, and the company leased additional manufacturing space. By 1907, production had reached approximately 2,900 cases a day. At roughly $1 of profit per case, each day's output represented thousands of dollars passing through boilers, rollers, ovens, cartons, and freight doors. The quiet brother, who had spent years managing another man's institution, now controlled a business whose principal problem was making enough cereal. Then the factory burned. In July 1907, fire destroyed the company's main manufacturing building. Heat, water, smoke, and collapsing material erased the orderly sequence William Keith Kellogg had built. A cereal company without its machinery was once again little more than a name, and Battle Creek already had plenty of those. He chose to rebuild. Within 6 months, a replacement plant was operating. The fire did more than interrupt production. It gave William Keith Kellogg an opportunity to arrange the factory around greater volume, replacing a young company's improvised spaces with a plant designed for continuous manufacture. Grain entered in bulk. Finished cases left by rail. Between those 2 points, the product moved through a controlled mechanical sequence, each step intended to make the next box resemble the last. Advertising continued while the machinery expanded. The signature grew familiar. The words Kellogg's of Battle Creek connected a family name to a city already associated with health foods. But they also carried the brothers toward a dispute that would last for years. John Harvey Kellogg had made the name known through medicine and the sanitarium. William Keith Kellogg was printing it on cereal sold across the country. Both men believed the public recognition belonged to him. In 1909, the business became the Kellogg Toasted Corn Flake Company. By then, the output figure associated with its Battle Creek operation had risen to 120,000 cases of corn flakes each day. 4 years earlier, William Keith Kellogg had still been working within his brother's organization. Now corn arrived by the carload. Cartons moved through the plant in columns, and the family signature traveled farther than either brother could. The factory had survived the fire. The name would be harder to divide. The dispute over the Kellogg name lasted longer than the first factory. John Harvey Kellogg had carried the family name into medical journals, lecture halls, and the dining rooms of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. William Keith Kellogg had placed the same name across railroad cars, newspaper pages, grocery shelves, and millions of cardboard boxes. One brother had made Kellogg mean a physician. The other had made it mean breakfast. In 1920, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled in favor of William Keith Kellogg's commercial use of the family name. 2 years later, his business became the Kellogg Company. The signature first printed to distinguish genuine corn flakes from dozens of imitations now belonged to an expanding corporation. The company did not remain a single product operation. Bran Flakes appeared in 1915, followed by All Bran in 1916. Rice Krispies arrived in 1928, giving the company a cereal sold partly through the sound it made after milk entered the bowl. Corn, wheat, rice, and bran required different cooking times, different machinery, and different treatment beneath the rollers. Each new product added storage bins, pipes, ovens, packaging lines, laboratory work, advertisements, and another reason for the Battle Creek plant to keep running. The factory consumed more than grain. It needed coal and electricity, lumber and paper, metal parts, and printer's ink. It needed machinists to repair rollers, engineers to manage steam, chemists to test food, clerks to record orders, artists to design cartons, and railroad crews to pull finished cases away from the loading platforms. A flake weighed almost nothing. Producing it supported heavy work. Battle Creek adjusted its daily rhythm to the company. Workers entered the plant in shifts and emerged carrying the smell of toasted grain in their clothing. Families arranged meals around factory hours. Local merchants waited for paydays. A wage earned beside an oven moved through grocery counters, rent payments, shoe stores, barber shops, and automobile dealerships. The cereal left Michigan in sealed cartons. Much of the money returned to the streets surrounding the plant. The relationship reached beyond the factory gates. William Keith Kellogg established services for employees that included a nursery, medical and dental care, and a pension fund for veteran workers. A dietitian attended to employees' children. These programs were practical arrangements in a factory that needed healthy workers and reliable attendance, but they also placed the company inside parts of life once handled entirely by households, churches, or local charities. Employment at Kellogg became more than a job description. It could determine when a family woke, which neighborhood it lived in, whether a child received dental treatment, and what income followed a worker into old age. The company did not govern Battle Creek. It occupied the spaces between government, work, and family. That position became clearest when the national economy failed. By 1930, factories across the United States were reducing hours, dismissing workers, or closing their doors. Grain could still move through Kellogg's machinery, but unemployed families could purchase only so many boxes. William Keith Kellogg and company president Lewis Brown responded with an experiment that treated time as something that could be divided and redistributed. On December 1st, 1930, most departments in the Battle Creek plant changed from 3 8-hour shifts to 4 6-hour shifts. The machinery could continue through the day, while an additional group of men and women entered the payroll. The arrangement created positions for some former employees and other unemployed residents of Battle Creek. The arithmetic entered thousands of homes. 6 hours meant lower daily earnings for some workers, but it also meant a job for someone who had none. It gave employees more hours away from the plant, while requiring the company to coordinate 4 arrivals and departures instead of 3. Newspapers and government officials studied the experiment. Inside Battle Creek, it could be seen more simply at the factory gates. One shift leaving while another took its place, 4 times every day. The same year, William Keith Kellogg established the foundation that carried his name. Its earliest work concentrated on children and families in Battle Creek and the surrounding region. The money had begun with cartons of cereal, passed through the company, and returned in clinics, health projects, education, and grants. Later, the foundation's reach would extend far beyond Michigan, but Battle Creek remained the place where the first investments were made. The signature was spreading from the box to the map. Kellogg was not the city's only cereal business. Post remained a major employer, and its products continued to leave Battle Creek under another nationally recognized name. Ralston survived the thinning of the earlier boom. The city also retained machine shops, metal works, rail facilities, and other manufacturers. Yet Kellogg became the name most difficult to separate from the place. National advertisements printed Battle Creek, Michigan, beneath the company address. Every carton carried a small geographical claim into an American kitchen. Children who had never visited Michigan learned the city's name from the breakfast table. The company expanded beyond Battle Creek, opening production in other countries and building a distribution system that no single Michigan factory could supply forever. That expansion strengthened the corporation while beginning a quiet change in its relationship with its birthplace. Kellogg could grow without placing every new oven beside the Battle Creek River. The name remained local. The machinery no longer had to be. For the moment, however, the hometown plant continued to draw workers by the thousands. Its production buildings formed a mechanical landscape of brick walls, tall windows, storage structures, conveyors, pipes, and rail sidings. Grain arrived in bulk and left divided into portions small enough for one family breakfast. Between arrival and departure stood the city's largest concentration of wages, machinery, and routine. A resident did not need to work for Kellogg to live inside its influence. A relative might work there. A neighbor might. A customer at the next counter might carry a company paycheck. The foundation supported local projects, the plant purchased services, and the Kellogg name appeared in conversations about employment, charity, health, education, and the future of the city. Battle Creek had once contained more than 80 cereal companies in some stage of existence. Most had disappeared because they could not make the same product, fill the same box, and find the same customer day after day. Kellogg had solved that problem so completely that Battle Creek inherited a different one. The company could now be found almost everywhere in the city. The city could be found almost nowhere without it. By the early 1980s, Battle Creek existed as two adjoining communities that looked like one from the air. The old city contained downtown, the cereal factories, municipal offices, and neighborhoods built close to the industrial core. Around it lay Battle Creek Township, with newer homes, open land, commercial strips, and thousands of residents who crossed the boundary without necessarily noticing it. Roads continued through both jurisdictions. Water, traffic, employment, and shopping ignored the line. Taxes and government did not. The city held approximately 35,700 people. The township held another 20,600. Together, they formed a community of more than 56,000, but on official documents Battle Creek appeared smaller, divided between two governments that had spent years arguing over territory, services, revenue, and development. Kellogg Company had become much larger than either one. The corporation now operated plants and offices far from Michigan, sold products internationally, and competed for executives, engineers, researchers, and investment, with companies based in metropolitan areas many times the size of Battle Creek. Its hometown remained printed on cereal boxes, but the corporation no longer depended on one railroad line or one factory beside the river. Moving the headquarters would be difficult. It was no longer unimaginable. In 1982, Kellogg Company was considering construction of a new worldwide headquarters. Company leaders argued that the divided local government made Battle Creek less efficient and less attractive to prospective employees. A city of 35,000 beside a township of 20,000 looked weaker on paper than a single municipality of roughly 55,000. Consolidation, they said, would simplify government and give the area a stronger identity when recruiting workers and pursuing development. In May, the company delivered its position in terms no resident could mistake. If the city and township refused to merge, Kellogg Company would move its headquarters elsewhere, taking approximately 700 executive-level jobs with it. The company that had printed Kellogg's of Battle Creek for decades was asking Battle Creek to redraw itself. The proposal divided residents differently from the existing boundary. Supporters saw a chance to end territorial disputes, combine services, secure the headquarters, and prevent hundreds of well-paid jobs from leaving. Township opponents faced the prospect of higher taxes under consolidation. City residents were told that their taxes would decline as the two systems were equalized. Both sides understood that the vote was formally about government structure and practically about whether Kellogg would stay. Opponents called the threat corporate blackmail. The phrase placed two facts beside each other. Kellogg Company had supplied jobs, investment, charitable money, and a name recognized across the country. It was now using the possible removal of those things to shape a public decision. Company leaders described the same act as an economic necessity. The corporation, they said, could no longer compete effectively under the existing arrangement. A consolidated city would make it easier to attract workers, coordinate development, and commit new capital to Battle Creek. There was no hidden choice. 55,000 or nothing. The referendum went before voters in November 1982. In the city, it passed by approximately 10 votes to 1. In the township, where opposition had been strongest and taxes were expected to rise, it passed by roughly 2 to 1. Turnout was described by one local official as possibly the largest the area had ever seen. On January 1st, 1983, Battle Creek Township disappeared as a separate government. The city changed shape overnight. Its land area expanded from approximately 19 square miles to more than 40. The official population climbed from about 35,700 to more than 56,000 without a moving truck crossing a street or a new house being built. Thousands of township residents went to sleep under one municipal name and woke beneath another. Battle Creek had grown by moving a line. Kellogg Company remained. Chairman William Lamothe announced that details of a new $30 million corporate headquarters would follow. The company also promised to place more than $1 million, representing taxes it would otherwise have paid over 5 years, into a fund supporting local entrepreneurs. Other area businesses added several million more for job creation. The headquarters opened downtown in 1986. Executives who might have been transferred elsewhere now entered a building in the city where the company had begun with 44 workers and a cornflake. The decision brought office employment and construction into the center of Battle Creek at a moment when many older downtowns were losing both. The merger therefore produced physical results. One government replaced two. The headquarters rose. Investment followed. Supporters could point to brick, glass, desks, and paychecks. The population figures told a quieter story. The new boundaries had assembled nearly all of urban Battle Creek inside a single city, leaving less surrounding population available for future annexation. After that one administrative leap, the number barely moved. In 2000, the city counted 53,364 residents. In 2010, it counted 52,347. The 2020 census found 52,721, 3 counts across 20 years, each separated by little more than 1,000 people. The map created in 1983 also made Battle Creek unusually large in land and thin in settlement. The city stretched across more than 42 square miles of land, including residential neighborhoods, industrial property, undeveloped fields, and portions of the former township that did not resemble the older blocks near downtown. Roads, utilities, policing, and public services now covered a territory more than twice the former size. A larger outline had to be maintained by roughly the same number of people. Kellogg Company continued investing in the city. The headquarters remained, and later projects brought research facilities and office jobs. The merger was not followed by the departure residents had feared, nor did consolidation restore the kind of population growth that factories had once produced through furnaces, loading docks, and thousands of hourly positions. The corporation was learning to grow through research, acquisitions, automation, and production elsewhere. Battle Creek had secured the address. It could not secure everything that happened behind it. The city entered the referendum as two communities with about 56,000 residents between them. It emerged as one city that would spend the next 4 decades hovering near 53,000. Nothing had vanished that night. Only the boundary had. For 80 years, visitors to Battle Creek could enter the Kellogg factory and watch breakfast being made. They followed corn from kernel to flake to carton. They heard grinders, conveyors, and packaging machines striking, rattling, and humming against the brick walls. They smelled grain as it passed through the ovens. At the end, children carried away cereal boxes, stickers, and samples that had been produced in the building they had just crossed. The tour joined manufacturing to place. A box on a grocery shelf might have come from anywhere, but inside the Battle Creek plant, the product had weight, heat, machinery, and workers standing beside it. The words, "Kellogg's of Battle Creek," could be heard in the movement of the line. More than 6.5 million people took the tour. On April 11, 1986, the company conducted the last one. Kellogg executives gave 2 reasons. The Battle Creek plant was about to receive new technology as part of a modernization program valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, and competitors had reportedly entered the factory to study its processes. The company did not intend to reveal new equipment to anyone capable of reproducing it elsewhere. The decision was also presented as a way to protect employment. Kellogg officials said that modernizing the plant without public tours could preserve approximately 1,000 jobs among the 2,800 people then working there. The visitors would leave so that the workers could remain. The final days showed how much the tour had become part of Battle Creek. On one Monday, more than 7,000 people entered the plant, setting a single-day record. School children arrived by train and bus. In only 3 morning hours, approximately 2,000 visitors watched corn pass through the stages that William Keith Kellogg had spent years refining. Then the doors closed. The cereal continued to leave the factory, but the public could no longer follow it inside. For Battle Creek, this removed more than a tourist attraction. It severed the simplest physical proof of the city's claim. Families could still read the company address and smell toasted grain in the air, but they could no longer stand above the machinery and see the product moving beneath them. A replacement took 12 years. In May 1998, a new attraction opened on West Michigan Avenue in downtown Battle Creek. Kellogg's Cereal City occupied a 2-story building of approximately 45,000 square feet, designed to resemble an early 20th century factory. The Heritage Center Foundation spent about $22 million constructing and equipping it, with the state of Michigan contributing approximately $2,800,000. Admission cost $7.95. Inside, visitors encountered the history of the Kellogg brothers, cereal advertisements, branded characters, exhibits, food, and a simulated production line. The Red Onion Grill borrowed its name from a restaurant associated with the Battle Creek Sanitarium. An ice cream parlor served sundaes topped with cereal. The walls and machinery recalled the industrial city that had formed around boilers, rollers, ovens, and cartons. Nothing in the display needed to be invented. The history had happened within walking distance, but no cereal was manufactured there. The original tour had taken visitors through an operating plant and treated the machinery as the attraction. The new attraction constructed machinery to represent a plant. Heat became lighting. Production became demonstration. Workers became historical figures. The factory tour had returned without the factory. The timing placed 2 versions of Battle Creek beside each other. In the same years that the city invested in presenting cereal production as its heritage, Kellogg Company was reducing production employment in its hometown. Between 1997 and 1999, more than 1,700 Battle Creek jobs were eliminated as manufacturing shifted to other plants and to Mexico. In August 1999, the company announced that most of its aging South plant would close. Approximately 550 additional positions were attached to that decision, part of the broader series of reductions already moving through the city. The plant had about 100 workers, nearly half of Kellogg's 2,250 Battle Creek employees at the time. For the company, the arithmetic involved excess capacity, cheaper store brands, changing breakfast habits, and annual savings estimated between $35 million and $45 million. For the city, it appeared in smaller pieces: an empty locker, a missing automobile in the employee lot, a family calculating whether a $22 an hour factory wage could be replaced. Visitors at Cereal City could still watch grain move along a simulated line. Across town, real lines were being shut down. The attraction had been planned for more than 400,000 visitors each year. Its opening year brought approximately 162,000, the largest attendance it would record. Between 2000 and 2005, the annual average settled near 86,000. The building required at least 100,000 paying visitors each year to remain financially viable. In 2006, only 75,500 came through the doors. That was enough people to fill a large arena repeatedly, but less than 1/5 of the number imagined when the project was planned. The exhibits still operated. The restaurant could still serve a meal connected to the sanitarium. The simulated machinery could still demonstrate a process performed elsewhere. The visitors were not arriving in sufficient numbers to watch it. Kellogg's Cereal City closed in January 2007. The city faced approximately $875,000 in obligations connected to the traction. Kellogg Company purchased the building for $2 million, clearing the debt, and converted the space into commercial offices. The structure was later donated to Battle Creek Public Schools and became home to a mathematics and science center. The factory-shaped building remained on West Michigan Avenue. Children still entered it. The cereal line was gone. The Kellogg Company did not disappear through bankruptcy, demolition, or a darkened factory. It disappeared through paperwork. On October 2, 2023, the corporation founded in Battle Creek in 1906 completed its division into two publicly traded companies. The surviving legal entity changed its name to Kellanova and took the global snack business, international cereal operations, noodles, frozen foods, and brands such as Pringles, Pop-Tarts, and Cheez-It. A new company named for William Keith Kellogg received the North American cereal business, including Corn Flakes, Rice Krispies, Frosted Flakes, Raisin Bran, and Fruit Loops. The cereal company remained headquartered in Battle Creek. Kellanova made Chicago its headquarters, while retaining employees and offices in Michigan. The division revealed how far the corporation had traveled from the first toasted flake. Kellanova represented approximately 82% of the former company's sales. The North American cereal business, the activity that had built the name, the factory, and much of Battle Creek's 20th century identity, represented the smaller portion. A century earlier, cereal had been the company. Now it was one piece being separated from everything cereal had purchased. At the time of the division, the two businesses together employed approximately 2,000 people in Battle Creek. That was still a substantial collection of desks, laboratory benches, machinery, loading areas, and paychecks. It was also half the 4,000 workers employed at the hometown plant alone during its early 1970s peak. The old relationship had become difficult to count. A worker in Battle Creek might make North American cereal for the company carrying William Keith Kellogg's name. Another might work for Kellanova on snack brands managed from Chicago. Both could occupy offices descended from the same corporation, while the word Kellogg's continued appearing on products belonging to each. The signature survived the separation. The companies did not remain independent for long. On September 26, 2025, Ferrero completed its purchase of the North American Cereal Company for approximately $3.1 billion. The former public corporation became a wholly owned subsidiary of the confectionery group. Ferrero said Battle Creek would remain the headquarters of its North American cereal operations and continued investing in the local plant. By late 2025, the cereal business employed approximately 850 people in Battle Creek. Kellanova retained about 600 more in the city. Then, on December 11, Mars completed its purchase of Kellanova for nearly $36 billion. The larger descendant of Kellogg Company joined a corporation known for candy, pet food, and snacks. By the end of that year, both companies created in the 2023 separation belonged to other privately controlled businesses. The Kellogg Company no longer existed as the independent corporation that had once asked Battle Creek to merge with its township. Kellogg's Corn Flakes still existed. Cereal was still manufactured on Porter Street. Post continued operating a Battle Creek plant with hundreds of workers. The city still contained laboratories, food companies, packaging knowledge, rail connections, and workers whose families had spent generations around industrial ovens and production lines. The smell of toasted grain had not completely left the air, but cereal no longer carried the entire employment structure of the city. The Rolston plant closed in 2017. Kellogg's production workforce had contracted through repeated rounds of automation, consolidation, and relocation. Denso, a Japanese-owned automobile parts manufacturer, employing approximately 2,500 people, became the area's largest employer. At Fort Custer Industrial Park, more than 80 facilities employed nearly 13,000 workers in industries that could not be poured into a breakfast bowl. The city had diversified in buildings and payrolls while remaining cereal in language. The name Kellogg appeared at Kellogg Square, Kellogg Arena, Kellogg Community College, the foundation headquarters, and the house William Keith Kellogg once occupied. It appeared on signs directing visitors through downtown and on cereal boxes carried out of grocery stores thousands of miles away. Some of those institutions belonged to the company's history. Others belonged to the fortune that had been removed from the company and placed into the foundation. Ownership could change in a transaction. A name embedded in a street grid was slower. Each June, Battle Creek still holds its National Cereal Festival. Tables are placed along McCamley Street, where residents and visitors receive cereal, milk, and juice without charge. The event grew from the breakfast table that entered the record books in 1979, when tables were arranged end to end through downtown. The modern version is shorter, but the bowls remain. Nearby stands the factory-shaped building once occupied by Kellogg's Cereal City. The simulated production line is gone. Students now enter the building to study mathematics and science, passing through a structure designed to resemble the kind of factory their parents and grandparents once entered for work. A few blocks away, cereal still moves through the real plant. Corn is cooked, dried, rolled thin, toasted, and sealed behind the signature William Keith Kellogg placed on his boxes when Battle Creek was crowded with imitations. The machinery is hidden from visitors now. The cartons leave anyway. Beyond the plant, the Battle Creek River reaches the Kalamazoo at the same confluence Sans McCamley examined in 1831. The water passes brick factories, office buildings, bridges, and streets, carrying the names left by the city's different lives. It moves west beneath the bridge, carrying no company name.